before we do that, I want to talk to you about getting your own drums and stuff to 0, actually, before we go any further. And say we've got a kick drum. Let's find a kick drum. I could make one, but this probably be quicker. I'll just grab one in here. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, so we use this as an example. So we say we found a kick drum, we've designed a kick drum, recorded a kick drum, downloaded a kick drum. It doesn't really matter. And to get it to sound as fat as possible, I want to get it to 0 decibels. And I'll explain when we get to past all this why. So we use things called clippers. So let me go here, grab this thing here. Do you know what a clipper does? Yeah, it chops off some peaks, and it does also introduce harmonic distortion as well. So a limiter is what traditionally you would put on your master bus, and it would stop things going into the red. And limiters are like very aggressive compressors, and they have a bit of push and pull to them, and they can be really good. Limiters, especially digital limiters these days, are really clever. But also clippers are really good, and you can use them on your master bus. And they used to traditionally do it with like clipping tape to get things to sound loud and punchy. You roll off things called transients, or you can clip your, I don't know where your A to D converter is in here, but you can, down there, Pro Tools. You can, if you was recording something into it, you could run it a bit hot, and it would literally do this. It would take this kick drum. You see, this is the kick drum here. It looks a bit strange. If I bring this down, this line, we start to cut off unwanted parts of the drum. If there's a transient, right? Let me see if I can redesign this a bit with a... Could I do this in Ableton? I could do this really quickly in Cubase. But say if we... Maybe if I click on it... now let's just do it like this. Easiest way of doing it. Say if I like the sound of this kick drum, but it looks like this, yeah? The transient, the first part of it, which I've left in orange, is going to be hitting 0, right? And you don't really want to be redlining things, and otherwise your mix gets out of control. So how can we bring the body of this kick drum up to fill the graphic on there, to make it sound nice and fat? Because at the moment, it's got a really nice punch to it. So yes, you could turn it down and rebalance it with volume, but that's not how it's going to run today, because I've just cut it. So we could do that. I'm going to do it like this as well, make it so we've just got more of the transient. So now it's like this. We've got a really nice punchy sort of click to it, but we've got no body to it. So we're going to use a, not transient shaper, a clipper. See that red? That's cutting, that's the transient, and it's going to cut off more and more of it until we bring this sort of bluey silvery colour up to the top. And if we put an oscilloscope on it, just so you can see it, I'll get to the point of all this in a second. And you can do this the same with snares and many different instruments. Oh, what is it? Not the group. No, that one. So without the transient shaper, no, the clipper, it looks like this, no body to it. And then the clipper is basically cutting off that transient and allowing the body of your drum to come up. Does that make sense? You can do it with compression and other things, but it's so long-winded. So if I'm trying to make my drums sound fat, if I've got a snare drum, I'm like, right, I want to cut that transient, I want to bring the body of it up and so on. But hey, you have to use your ears, and it is a bit of experience, and then you can introduce bits of EQ and stuff like that. But this is the real way of getting things to sound fat, and it traditionally comes from back when I was using tape and so on like that. Right, so that's that. So we could do it with snares, we could even do it with bass, we could do it with lots of things. If I'm making sounds for sample packs as well, they want them to be like at 0, 808s and stuff like that. You know, you've got to make things sound as fat as possible so they're just ready to use. There's no point if I released a sample pack of 100 of them kick drums with just that transient on it, you're going to be like, these kicks are weak. Do you know what I mean? It's because the transient's too loud. So that's one way around it, bringing everything up to 0. Okay, cool. So let me get rid of that. And now we're going to go back to where we were. If I could just get this down like this. Right, I'm confusing myself. So we've got the drums in there with the kick. So you can see these are already done and kind of leveled up. Then we got sub bass, right? Take the loop and put it over here. If we look at the master down here, you can see it's like way into the red. So if I put a clipper on it, like we was just using, you're going to end up with it catching some of the peaks here, but it's still distorting. So let's figure out how we can fix this. If I went back to this sub and soloed it, look at the master fader. It's saying it's almost 1 decibels quieter than 0. So I'm gonna bring it up a little bit. I want to get it to 0. Turn it around. That'll do. Right, so it's nice and loud. I know my kick drum's at 0 and my snare drum's at 0. My hi-hats are a bit quieter because you don't need them loud. That'd be crazy if your hi-hats are as loud as your snare. It's just not how it works. But when I had the kick in with the sub, what's going to happen to the master bus? What do you think is going to happen?
Go above 0.
It's going to
Go above 0.
go above 0, exactly. So what's a way of fixing that? What can you do to create space? Side chaining. So we quickly add some side chain, and it doesn't matter how you set up side chain. There's a plugin here which I sometimes use, which is called Kickstart, and you just select audio as your side chain input. And if you don't know what side chain is, I'll just explain quickly. It's just when your kick hits, it's like a volume ducker, and it turns the volume down for whatever you put it on. So for this instance, we put it on a sub bass. The kick's going to hit. Imagine it's like a little arm that just turns the volume down and turns it back up when the kick's gone. So it creates space for it. Side chaining. You can use side chaining in different ways, but that's what we're going to use it for today. So we put the kick in with the sub. You can see here this yellow thing is the kick drum coming through, and I'm going to put a snare drum through it as well and play it all together. Now we're probably still clipping a little bit. I'll take the clipper off. Doesn't actually sound that bad, does it? I mean, the rattling is, I think it's this rack unit. It's quite a clean because you've got a clean sine and sub bass, and you've got nice drums. Back in the day when I was trying to fatten up sines, by the way, or sub bass, you know, going back a little bit, I would use distortion. I would use all sorts of stuff. I was completely unaware that you could just sort of add additional harmonics in synthesis. Cool. So we've now got a resound, which I've kind of messed up, which sounds a bit crazy, but we'll probably reset it and then add it to this. And then we're going to look at creating a bit of space, and then we're going to compare it to other people's music. And then I'm going to explain why I've done it like this. And then you'll be like, hold on a minute, you just made the tune sound absolutely amazing. Without actually doing any mixing. Yeah? Are you following me? Okay. Let me just take this back. I'm going to put the sub in.
So far.
One thing I don't need is, there are some effects on this. Bit of distortion and a bit of whatever. It does help with the sound, but it's not essentially needed. But we can have a look at them afterwards. So I'm going to cut out the low frequencies of this. I want to quickly talk about EQ as well while we're here. Cut out the low frequencies because we're going to use them from the sub. Remember, the sub's got some harmonics in, so we can cut it out. We use our ears, but we don't have to just cut it out at 50 or whatever. We can give it a bit, find a crossover point between the two. Just the thing about EQ, right? If you do like weird hard cuts like this, it ends up causing things like phase issues. And like, if I start talking about this and you start looking into it, don't get too hooked up in it because you start to not wanting to use EQ. But if you do too harsh cuts, it has many different negative effects to sound. So try and keep your cuts broad, yeah, not more like that sort of thing, because it causes phase issues that you can't see on analyzers. Well, you can, but you can't see, and it's quite hard to hear but it create many problems down the line. So when you're doing EQ, try and make it gentle. Trust me, it helps a lot. Okay, so I won't go into that because otherwise you'll never want to use an EQ ever again. So I'm going to take the pitch dive out of this just because the sub's not doing it for the time being. All good, right? We've just got that in there. You know, we could add make this whatever. So we've not written a riff, we've not done anything, we've not done any EQ, we're just relying on a good kick, a good snare, a hi-hat, a reese, and a sub bass with harmonics in it. Okay? So let's look at it in the world of, do you know what LUFS are? Yeah? If you don't know, they're just a way of measuring how loud or music is. Why was it? Why are you laughing?
Well, the second years have just done LUFS in Masters.
Okay, so I'll probably undo everything you've learned, but LUFS are just a way of just seeing how loud things are, really. Like,
You've already undone a lot of what we learned.
yeah, sorry, but this is just how I do it. But yeah, LUFS are good. RMS is important still, and so on. But let's look at the LUFS of this, and you can do that with many different insight. If I spell it right, maybe if I go to plugins, insight. How do you spell it? Here we go. I don't know which one's which. Sorry about that. So a mastering engineer would probably say to you, if they start talking about, especially streaming Spotify, you've got different loudnesses that you need to not achieve, stick in, sort of thing. But really it's come down to this in all forms of music and dance music, rock music and stuff, not jazz and things or classical. We need to hit around between eight LUFS is good, believe it or not. They say 14 is the one. But if you do 14 and you upload your record, and I've done 8, my record still sounds louder. They've got it wrong, unfortunately. You know, that's just how it is. So, yeah, it's annoying, but let's see what these LUFS are hitting. Like, it should be, I reckon it's going to be around, I'm going to have a guess, because if I put more mids and a bit more tops in the reese, I reckon we'd probably hit around 6. I reckon it's going to be around 9 or 8. 11. It's not good, is it? So we need to achieve more LUFS, and we could do that with EQ. So it would be bringing things out and probably turning the reese up to be around 0 as well.
You still have the clipper on the master.
Yeah, it is at the moment, yeah. Let's give this a bit more volume and see where we're at now. Okay, so we're heading almost in sort of like what I'm saying, in the region for it to be loud enough pretty much for a club and for Spotify or streaming services as well. So how could we make this sort of louder without sort of going above 0 and start messing around with volume? So then you can start introducing things like EQ and stuff like that to bring out frequencies and perceived loudness. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Like, and I would probably do that. Say if I was making a track, and we look at one of my tracks in a minute, I would have maybe, there's many different types of clippers, but like a clipper after the snare, and then take an EQ, could be any type of EQ, like this, and put it before an EQ into the clipper. That way I'm not just consistently, because every EQ point I add will create more loudness. It would go up in decibels as well on your faders. Makes sense? Even on here, if you keep EQing, I don't even know what the EQ is on here. I'll pretend that one is, yeah? Every time I do that, even though it's at 0, my meter's going to go up and up and up because you're increasing amplitude, I suppose you call it, in frequency. Yeah. So I like to put clippers, if I want to get things fatter, after what I'm EQing. I mean, don't do this with vocals, don't do it with many instruments, but say if it was like snare drum stuff that's really short, you can EQ into the clipper, right? And I could make this snare sound like it's getting louder. It's not getting any louder than what it was at. It's still at 0 decibels because the clipper's got putting a lid on it. It won't let it go above 0. So if I turn this EQ off, it should drop in volume.
So is it clipping more?
it's
Because
just
you've raised the signal.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
cutting more of it off.
Yeah.
So let's bypass the EQ. Cool. So now, all right, it's a bit top heavy, but if I went and done that with the kick drum as well, maybe just copy these onto it. However you do it, I do. That one and that one, and then quickly change the EQ because it's kind of a bit weird for a kick. Then bypass it. It's not so obvious with a kick drum, but you can hear it's got more thump to it. So we've now increased the perceived loudness of the kick and snare, and you could go through, probably do the same to the Reese as well, even though I was saying, you know, don't do it on a sub, don't clip the sub, because the clipper does introduce harmonic distortion. And if you do that on a sub, you're kind of defeating the purpose of creating a really nice rounded harmonic sub. You just level it off to 0. Makes sense. We're trying to get everything to 0, and then we go to our master bus, see where it's at, and then work backwards. And all of a sudden it's like, oh man, this is so easy because I'm carving space. I know where I'm at. I don't have to worry about all my channels. I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to worry about that. I just have to worry about the master bus for a bit. Okay, what can I do on the master bus? Well, you go back to maybe your Reese and carve a little bit of EQ out of it where you don't need it. Bring it out of it, create a bit more space, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, mix is done. Cool? It's not that easy, but it is, you know. You just have to get used to doing this kind of weird method. Right, so let's look at this Reese. What did I put on it already? EQ. Did I put a clipper? I just put a clipper on it. So let's see what we can get out of it. Right, it sounds horrible, but I'm going to leave it like that because it's just a demonstration. Now let's look at the master again. Maybe, and let's look at Insight. That one. Right, now we're at -2. I must have put Insight on the wrong thing, actually. I think I just put it on the synth. Now we're at -2 LUFS, which is breaking all records. Because as a mastering engineer, -2 LUFS.
What am I supposed to do with that?
Yeah. So but we don't need you anymore. Yeah. But so -2 LUFS is ridiculous. Like, and it still sound audible. Like it is possible to get positive LUFS, but it does sound like shit. You know, you can do it. Right. Let's listen to it. So we've got problems with it where the kick drum, obviously I've EQ'd in, it didn't really need the EQ, and the kick drum's a bit the Reese is really jumping out. However, it doesn't sound written off, does it?
At least we're at -2 LUFS.
You could get away with this being a tune. So let's go to the kick quickly. I'm just going to take some of the EQ off, and then we're going to look at the master bus and try and work backwards. It's only really, you don't really need all this, but I'll just keep a bit of it. Take it down a little bit, because otherwise the neighbours complain. And then we'll be on headphones.
Right, don't worry.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring a bit of this down, just because it's cutting a bit. That'll do. And then go to the Reese, and maybe just bring this bump down here, because it doesn't really need it. Could be warmer. You know, and this is the sort of where you're EQing now, and it just comes from a bit of experience, like how can I balance a sound and stuff like that. And when we look at a bit of sound design, which we will do, of creating sounds, if you could start getting into your head creating sounds with a nice frequency spectrum as well, with the right sub in it, the right mids and the right tops, even if you're just designing a bass patch, it's so good if you get them right, because you could just add a kick, snare, hi-hat, bass patch, sick. You know, it's about getting everything right from the start. Right, cool. Where are we at now? So the master bus, we could use a limiter on the master bus, we can use a clipper. It's clipping quite a lot. It's given us like 9 decibels of gain reduction or clipping, which is crazy, but if you're working into it, it's not too bad, you know, doesn't matter. If you wanted to create some headroom, there's no point going and turning all your channels down, you know. If I explain this a bit, then we can move forward. Gain staging is important when you use things like analog gear because they have a different type of headroom. So digital, you know, I don't know that much about it, but digital is 0 decibels, dBs, I think, something like that. Is that right?
DBFS, yeah.
dBFS. Right, so that's full scale. Whereas analog equipment, it's like -18 or -12, I don't know, -18. So if I was to feed full digital signal into any of that gear, it's going in 18 decibels too loud. Does that make sense? They've just got 2 different loudness settings. Digital's louder, analog's quieter. So if you pump digital into analog, it distorts. So you have to bring down your digital level for when you feed it into a piece of hardware. Make sense? It's just how it's just worked out. The thing is, if you're mixing in the box, some of the plugins, for some reason, especially if they're analog plugins, they are trying to replicate analog plugins so well that you need to sometimes turn down your channels so they're fed at -18 decibels. Sometimes. Some of the UAD plugins, Acoustica, Waves, some of them you have to be really aware of this. Whereas something like a Pro Q, you can just go crazy with it because it's got almost infinite headroom because it's in a digital realm. So you have to learn your plugins and really learn each plugin. You don't just go and get all your mates' plugins and just start using them. You have to learn, like read the manuals, unfortunately, on how they work. Like a door, inside this, even though the meters, like the lights come on, there's still loads of headroom inside your door. Like someone said to me on my Instagram post, it was like, oh, you're redlining the mixer where I was scratching at the weekend. In some club, and I was like, yeah, all the red lights on, but this mixer's got 18 decibels of hidden headroom in here. Do you know what I mean? So these lights are only a gauge of where the other tunes are balancing. Make sense? Still got 18 decibels of headroom. Your door has loads. I think it's like, I'm going to make it up, like 70 decibels of this headroom that you can't see. But your master bus doesn't, and some of your plugins doesn't. So when you look at your mixer, I like to work around 0, but sometimes if it goes into the red and stuff, I'm cool with it because I understand 90% of it sometimes of what I'm doing. You know, I have a grasp of, okay, that doesn't matter if I go a little bit into the red there or this and that. And, you know, as long as it's giving me the sound, because at the end of the day, it's about using your ears. But yeah, you have to really sort of learn your plugins or your analog gear, what you can push things to, and so on. It's not as easy as like every EQ's the same and so on. Can't remember my original point, but does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so headroom. All right. So if we think my master, oh, this is the original point. Let's find a gain tool. If my master is going a bit into the red, or the flat line is clipping too much, like this. This clipper, instead of taking all my channels, like say if I'm in a mix like this, but they're all a bit like this because I've set them up like this, which I wouldn't because I try and keep them all at 0. Instead of me having to go like this inside a door, why don't just have, you know, bus them all almost and just have one fader that turns it down a bit so the master fader doesn't get hit with all these decibels. Make sense? You can do that with a gain tool. So you just put a gain tool before your flat line, your clipper, your limiter. Yeah. Yeah, good tell I don't use mixers. So now I can just do this and then bring them down. Whereas back in the day, and I'm sure all of you had to try and create some headroom, you grab all the faders in the door and bring them all down. Has anyone ever done that? You don't need to. You know, there's plenty, your tutors would explain to you how much headroom there is in a door. It's just literally the channels are there as a guide pretty much these days. And it didn't used to be like that, but they'd come up with 32-bit and 64-bit floating point and all this sort of stuff. I can't remember, that might be to do with RAM, I can't remember, there's two of them. but there's definitely this headroom in it. So yeah, that's just a quick cheat. But let's listen to this tune. I can hear on these amazing monitors, the sidechain is causing a bit of pumping. So I'm just on the kick, so I'm just going to shorten that a bit. Well, we could sit here and mess around with things, but let's now reference other people's music, which has been written, mastered, and everything. Let's load someone else's track in it and see how far we are off it sounding as good as theirs, considering we've done nothing yet, apart from one Reese, one sub, kick, snare, hi-hat. So it's going to sound terrible. Right, let's just take this. It's a new Coven AMC tune that comes out this week. I have no idea what it sounds like in a studio. I played it out, it sounded amazing. Now, if we compare what we've done, and we've done nothing yet, just remember that. How far away from it? Well, I can tell you this just by listening to it. This snare's got loads of stereo on it for a start, and if you start to spread stuff into the stereo world, because we haven't done any of that, you're going to get a much sort of, not louder, but you're going to get a much broader image. They've got obviously more fuzzy tops, they've got more percussion, they've got more of this, they've got more of that. But if I wanted to make this tune sound like that, it wouldn't take me too long. You know, it just wouldn't, because it's really about pushing out the right frequencies, adding some more instruments, adding some more percussion. So that was quite a particularly loud tune. Let's see what else we can compare it to. Let's take this. So my friend Chris's remix of Basement Jacks is just done. Okay, so let's do an experiment and see if we can get it louder then. So I'm gonna take the gain off, because it actually sounds fine. Now we compare it to Chris's. Now we've won the war and we haven't really done anything. So that was really the reason it wasn't cutting through, was because I made a mistake and left that gain plug-in on, which I was only going to show you as a a way of turning things down. Thank God for that, because I thought I just waffled all the way through it and the tune wasn't that loud. So now we're going to play this AMC tune again and Coven. So we're in the ballpark, right? And if you just think what we've got in this record, which is a kick, snare, hi-hat, sub and Reese, and we've done nothing. Done a bit of EQ, bit of clipping, and we've got something that sounds nice and loud. The key to this, though, is having a really rich sub that's nice and solid. If you haven't got that, then your mix might sound okay in certain environments, but you go and play it into a club and it can fall on its ass. Does that make sense? So you're all with me? So, yeah?
So if it was at that level, and that's your like pre-mix, pre-master, whatever, would you send that off to be mastered?
You could just put a gain tool on it.
Yeah, because at that point that's like...
I mean, sometimes you could take the gain off, but you got to think, the problem with what used to happen, or with me, is when I'm working into a limiter or clipper, just take limiter, on when I'm making tunes, when I take that off, all of a sudden everything could be really unbalanced, because the snare drum's been going to the limiter so hard that even though with the limiter on it sounds great, when I take it off and go to send it to a mastering engineer, they'd be like, what the fuck's this? Excuse my language, but like everything's unbalanced. And I'd be like, yeah, but it sounds good with the limiter on. And they were like, well, I can't do anything then, because you're going in so hard to the limiter. But the way this is set up, everything's still at zero. Nothing is going to be super loud. Nothing's going to be well out of control, within reason.
So let's take the clipper off the main.
Let's take it off. Yeah, and I turn it down. I could do it on the master fader. I could turn it down with this gain tool. It doesn't matter. It doesn't sound any different. No different. Take that off. Yeah, because everything's at 0. So you know, take this with a pinch of salt and think about it. But this is my method after making music for 15 plus years. I got in so many areas where saying to master engineers things were wrong, this, that, and the other. I was like, how can I simplify this? How can I really make it as simple as possible? And I thought, well, I'm trying to get to 0 decibels. I'm trying to get things to sound punchy and loud. Let's start at 0 and work down, rather than trying to work up to it. Because you keep going up and up and up. Sometimes, you know, the more channels you keep adding, the more lost you get, and like things can just go crazy. Like, we have a look at one of my tunes, but like, even that's quite a simple tune we're going to look at. But some of my tunes have had like 150 channels in it, and I've mixed loads of them down as well. And when they're all like different volumes like this on a mixer, I mean, I've got no control over it. When I'm, you know, you forget what's in the record almost. So yeah, does that make sense? And if you take everything else that you learn from your tutors and try and apply some of that to this sort of method, all of a sudden you'll be like, okay, you had some reverb, some stereo whips, some this, some saturation, some blah, 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 but trying to keep a lid on things. And, you know, the problem is if I was clipping stuff like this, that doesn't sound too bad, and it's super loud, but what happens to the waveform is it just becomes a block. Yeah, which then doesn't translate in a club so much, because you still need some part of the snare to be the main part of it. It can't all be the main part of it. The tail of a real snare drum is not the body of a snare. It's the initial crack. It's not the tss at the end. But what that's done is brought the tss up as well. So yes, it cuts through the mix, but you play that in a club, it loses all its weight, because it's just everything's on full blast now. You know what I mean? So you have to use it sympathetically, or have some sort of lid on it. And like I was saying, if you like the sound of something, why not EQ into a clipper? You know, this is one way of doing it. I've had many different ways. If you see some of my other lectures, when I came down here, I used to work into groups, but I found that working to groups with limiters on, I found that great at the time, but I needed to refine it more. And it's more about individual sounds, getting things to sound balanced, using clipping tools, bit of EQ, saturation, 10 years later, you'll be like, oh, he was talking rubbish. But you get what I'm saying, yeah? Okay, cool. So I haven't undone everything that you've learnt, because this is just how I'm doing it. Yeah. But just remember, headroom is important. Plugins, hardware. You need to understand how everything works. I didn't for years, and I just, you know, sometimes you'd be able to produce quite a good sounding record, and then other times it would just sound awful, you know, and then sending it to, I don't need to say that, sending it to mastering engineers, and they can't help you. And you in my head at the time, 10 years ago, I'd be like, but you're supposed to make it sound great. Why can't you do it? Because I'd messed it up.